What do a convicted sex trafficker and the price of silver have in common? The answer is worth $2 billion, and the people who control it don't want you to know. 4 days ago, the United States Department of Justice released 3 million pages of documents about Jeffrey Epstein, 2,000 videos, 180,000 images. The media is obsessing over celebrity photos, politicians, the private island. But buried in these files is a connection that changes everything we thought we knew about how global finance actually works. JPMorgan Chase, the largest bank in America, processed over $1.1 billion in suspicious transactions for Jeffrey Epstein. The same bank, during the same years, was running a criminal operation to manipulate the price of silver and gold. Not allegedly, not theoretically. They admitted it in federal court. They paid $920 million in fines. Their traders went to prison. And here's what makes this different from every other financial scandal you've heard about. The Department of Justice charged them under RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, the same law designed to take down the mafia. One executive at JPMorgan exchanged over 1,200 emails with Jeffrey Epstein. In those emails, they used code names: Snow White, Beauty, and the Beast. Federal prosecutors believe these were references to young women. That same executive described his relationship with Epstein as profound. His word, not mine. He visited Epstein's private island. He emailed Epstein from a yacht anchored in the Virgin Islands while Epstein was in prison, writing, "I owe you much, and I deeply appreciate our friendship. I have few so profound." This isn't speculation. This is evidence. Court documents, sworn testimony, federal convictions. And when you understand how these two scandals connect, Epstein's money and the silver manipulation, you'll see a system designed not to catch criminals, but to protect them. As long as they're rich enough. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to March 2008. Because that's when JPMorgan inherited a problem and turned it into an empire. When Bear Stearns collapsed in March 2008, JPMorgan Chase swooped in like a vulture. They acquired the dying bank for $2 a share, pennies on the dollar. What most people do not realize is that Bear Stearns had two things JPMorgan wanted very badly: a massive precious metals trading operation and a client named Jeffrey Epstein who had just invested $57 million in one of their hedge funds. JPMorgan didn't just get the assets, they got the traders, they got the strategies. They got the client relationships. And within months, something shifted on their precious metals desk. Traders began executing what federal prosecutors would later describe as tens of thousands of deceptive trading sequences. The strategy was called spoofing, placing enormous orders with no intention of filling them, manipulating other traders into moving prices, then canceling the fake orders and pocketing the difference. From 2008 to 2016, JPMorgan traders systematically rigged the markets for gold, silver, platinum, and palladium. Michael Nowak ran the global precious metals desk. Greg Smith executed the trades. John Edmonds, another trader who later pleaded guilty, testified that he learned how to manipulate markets directly from his supervisors, and that he executed hundreds of illegal trades with the knowledge and consent of management. This wasn't a rogue operation, it was institutional culture. Now layer this over the Epstein timeline. The executive who managed JPMorgan's relationship with Epstein was a man named Jess Staley. Between 2008 and 2012, Staley exchanged over 1,200 emails with Epstein from his official JPMorgan email account. In those messages, Staley called Epstein boss. He asked Epstein for career advice. He visited Epstein's private island multiple times. And in July 2010, they had a conversation about Disney princesses. Staley wrote, "Say hi to Snow White." Epstein replied, "What character would you like next?" Staley answered, "Beauty and the Beast." Epstein's response, "Well, one side is available." If you're starting to see the pattern here, if this is changing how you think about how these institutions actually operate, hit that subscribe button. Because what comes next is where everything connects. The same compliance department that was supposed to catch Epstein's suspicious transactions was supposed to catch the silver manipulation, and they failed, at both in exactly the same way. In September 2020, the truth finally came out. JPMorgan entered into a deferred prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice, admitting to wire fraud in connection with their precious metals manipulation. The CFTC imposed a $920 million penalty, the largest fine in the agency's history. Michael Nowak was convicted. Greg Smith was convicted. In February 2025, they were sentenced to federal prison. But here's what the settlement revealed that almost nobody talks about. JPMorgan's compliance department flagged Epstein's accounts multiple times. They raised concerns about suspicious wire transfers. They documented patterns that looked exactly like money laundering. And every single time, Jess Staley intervened. He vouched for Epstein personally. He told compliance to stand down. In one email, Staley wrote to Epstein, "You have paid a price for what has been accused, but we know what you have done for us, and we count you as one of our deepest friends and most honest of people. This was written after Epstein's 2008 conviction for soliciting a minor. Staley knew. The compliance department knew. The bank kept processing his transactions anyway. Senator Ron Wyden's investigation found that while Epstein was alive and actively trafficking women and girls, JPMorgan reported only $4.3 million in suspicious activity to federal regulators. After Epstein died, they filed retroactive reports covering $1.3 billion, almost 300 times more. They knew the whole time. They just didn't report it until they had no choice. Now here's the turn. In January 2026, just last month, something unprecedented happened in the silver market. In 7 days, 33 million ounces of silver were physically withdrawn from COMEX vaults for delivery. That's 26% of the registered inventory, gone in 1 week. And guess who delivered 99% of that metal? JPMorgan Chase, the same bank that manipulated silver prices for 8 years, the same bank that financed Epstein, the same bank that paid nearly $1 billion in fines. They're now the largest holder of physical silver in the Western financial system, and they're delivering it as fast as buyers can take it. So here's what all of this means when you connect the dots. The Epstein Files Transparency Act forced the release of over 6 million pages of documents. On January 30th, 2026, the DOJ published 3 million additional pages, along with thousands of videos and hundreds of thousands of images. The documents reveal email exchanges between Epstein and Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Steve Bannon, and dozens of other powerful figures. They show that Epstein was named as a potential executor of Jess Staley's will. They expose how deep the network actually reached. But here's the question that keeps me up at night. If JPMorgan processed over $1 billion in suspicious transactions for Epstein, and they simultaneously ran a criminal precious metals operation for 8 years, and both schemes were enabled by the exact same compliance failures, what does that tell you about the system? It tells you that compliance isn't designed to stop crime. It's designed to provide plausible deniability when crime gets discovered. Think about it. JPMorgan paid $290 million to Epstein's victims. They paid $75 million to the U.S. Virgin Islands. They paid $920 million for the silver manipulation. That sounds like accountability until you realize JPMorgan generates that much revenue in approximately 5 hours. The fines aren't punishment. They're a licensing fee for operating outside the law. And now look at what's happening in the silver market. The metal broke $92 an ounce last month. Citigroup is forecasting $100 by March, potentially $110 by year end. COMEX inventories have dropped over 70% since 2020. There's a physical shortage, real metal, not paper contracts, and it's accelerating. In January alone, JPMorgan delivered over 8 million ounces of silver in a single day. So here's what I want you to think about. The same institution that suppressed silver prices for nearly a decade is now positioned to profit from the squeeze they helped create. They accumulated during the manipulation. Now they're distributing into the shortage. Is that coincidence, or is that the plan? Drop your answer in the comments, because if I'm wrong about this, I want to know why. Where does this leave us in February 2026? The Epstein files are still being analyzed. Every day, journalists and researchers find new names, new transactions, new evidence of how money flowed through institutions that were supposed to protect the public. Just last week, we learned that Epstein introduced Jess Staley to Benjamin Netanyahu, to members of the British royal family, to Silicon Valley billionaires. He was a connector, and JPMorgan was his bank. Jess Staley left JPMorgan in 2013. He became CEO of Barclays. In 2021, he resigned after regulators investigated whether he misrepresented his relationship with Epstein. In March 2025, he testified in a London tribunal that he had slept with a member of Epstein's staff, a woman Epstein introduced him to. The UK Financial Conduct Authority has banned him from holding senior positions in financial services. In September 2025, Congressman Thomas Massey claimed during a House hearing that Staley's name appears on a list, held by the FBI, of prominent men to whom Epstein allegedly trafficked young women. The system protected him for years. The same system that protected the silver manipulation. The same system that processes suspicious transactions and looks the other way when the client is important enough. Here's what you can do with this information. First, understand that the financial institutions you've been taught to trust operate on different rules for different people. When compliance officers raise red flags about a billionaire's suspicious wire transfers, those flags get overridden by executives who call that billionaire boss and visit his private island. When traders manipulate commodity prices on an industrial scale, it gets treated as a business expense. The fine is the cost of doing business. Second, watch the silver market. Not because I'm telling you to buy anything, that's not what this channel does, but because what's happening in physical precious metals right now is a stress test. The paper to physical ratio has been as high as 356 to 1. That means for every ounce of real silver, there were 356 ounces promised on paper. That system only works if nobody asks for delivery all at once. In January 2026, people started asking, and 26% of COMEX registered inventory vanished in a week. The documents that came out 4 days ago are just the beginning. More names will surface, more connections will be exposed. But the fundamental architecture remains intact. An architecture where wealth buys immunity, where banks police themselves, and where the true cost of corruption gets distributed across pension funds, retail investors, and everyone who trusted the system to be fair. At the beginning of this video, I asked you what a convicted sex trafficker and the price of silver have in common. Now you know the answer. They had the same bank, they had the same compliance failures, they had the same executives looking the other way, and when it all came out, they paid fines that barely registered on the quarterly earnings report. The empire isn't falling, it's adapting. The question isn't whether you'll be affected, it's whether you'll see it coming. Money doesn't lie, empires do, and now you know exactly how.